started with our breakout session here, focused specifically on education and youth. If you weren't planning on necessarily being in this room, that's okay. I invite all of you to put an education hat on, because all of us can contribute to this discussion and thinking about this. When Bridget introduced me in the main room, she mentioned that I'm a former K-12 classroom teacher, and I transitioned into public health, but still very much have my heart and mind at the intersection of both public education and public health. So I'm happy to be in this room with other folks who are my people, but also in conversation with anyone who's interested in thinking about the intersections of education and health. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to be here today, because I know that many of us work with teams, or we have, internal and external partners in the work we do. But I think there's also ways in which it can feel very lonely sometimes. And so part of my hope with us engaging here in this space today is that you all walk away with, just feeling some greater momentum for your interests and your work, and getting a better sense of who shares your interests and concerns, and just affirming that we can do great things when we work together and have each other's backs. So if you were in the morning session today, we will be doing something similar. I'll be kind of walking this group through about 7 questions, and you'll be able to interact with those through the AHA Slides platform. This is mostly going to be a digital discussion via the slides and in the chat. If we do have some time or opportunity, I might call on folks to expand on something they've shared, or if there's moments to unmute, I'll prompt you to do that, and hope you will do that. Setting the stage for our discussion a little bit, I wanted to share 2 quotes with you that I've referenced quite a bit in my own work. And one is from Joycelyn Elders, former US Surgeon General. And she had said in an interview once that she felt that we can't educate children who aren't healthy, and we can't keep them healthy if they're not educated. And there has to be a marriage between health and education. And similarly to that, the World Health Organization, time traveling back to 1997, had put out a report that included the line that schools can do more than any other single institution to improve the well-being and competence of children and youth. So I've thought a lot about that, in the classroom, in working in different roles in education, now in public health practice. And I think that that education, both the attainment of education and the educational environment influences health outcomes quite a bit. The content of the education that we provide itself, it gives people the health information and other subject information they need to be informed members of society. Having increased educational attainment is tied to all sorts of things like work opportunities, income opportunity, which unfortunately in our country also means that that's tied to opportunities for health insurance, the ability to take care of one's health. And then the environment itself has a lot to do with fostering self-esteem and self-worth in youth, contributing to our status and giving us relationships and a network. So I would argue that I wish we could sever some of those pathways. For example, your ability to have access to high quality healthcare shouldn't depend on your level of education, but that is our current state of things. And I want us to continue to think about what we can do, those of us working in education, who care about education, or other youth serving organizations and roles, the things that we can do to influence youth development and their health outcomes. So I want to get us started with our first question, and that's just to understand who's in the room here with us today. So I think we can launch the first slide, and I'll wait for that to come up on screen. So the first question here is just, what best defines your role related to education and youth? You might be an educator, a paraprofessional, parent, a student, a community partner. If you have multiple roles, you can indicate that. And you can respond to that. If you look at the top of the screen, you can either navigate to that link above or use the QR code and respond as well. And then my team who's in here, if folks are also responding via chat, if you could pop those responses into the slide, that would be great.
Geeta and Hannah, this is on my screen. When I type this in, it drops me to the last question number 7, not the first question. Is anybody else stuck there?
Yeah, me too.
Same here.
I can do some digging real quick. I'll stop sharing my screen 1 second.
Hannah, while you're troubleshooting that, I'm going to put that question in the chat too, and let's just go ahead and answer this first question in chat. Since I think with 40 folks in the room, we can get a sense of who's in the room via the chat as well. So already seeing some diversity of roles in the chat. School counselor, guardian ad litem, thank you for your work. Mental health support, SEL coordinator, folks who are engaging with our schools through different organizations and roles. See some folks that are legal advocates in different ways.
It is, the slide deck is now where it should be. So if you go back to that original link, it should pop back up.
Are folks able to see this and see the link and everything?
There we go.
Thanks everyone for your patience.
So if you already answered in the chat, you're welcome to pop your answer in here on the slides as well. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll move into some of our discussion questions, but wanted you all to get a sense of who's in the room with us as well. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm excited to see that folks are in so many different types of roles. I think that having a diversity of experience, lived experience in different ways that you're engaging with education and school systems and with youth is important to have. I want to move to the next slide. And this is going to come up as a word cloud. But if you could think of a word, let's start with a single word, although you might have more than one. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase healing centered in the context of education and youth services? Understanding. I would love to know for the person who responded with peace rooms, that's a new idea for me. If you feel comfortable writing a little more about that in the chat. I'd love to learn more about that, and perhaps other folks would as well. And we might get some more responses in here. I see the word cloud is still shifting. The first word that came in was understanding. And I wonder if we could hear, you can either unmute and jump in, that would be just fine. Or if you want to put it in a chat, could we expand a little more on the idea of understanding? So, does that mean that folks who are working with youth understand what it means to be trauma informed and healing centered? Does it mean, providing understanding to students and youth? Is it a culture of understanding? What do folks think about that? And Alana, thanks for describing peace rooms in the chat. So peace rooms are a restorative justice space within schools, sometimes workplaces that give people who need a time to decompress a space and a staff person to process conflict, grief, etc.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes,
Yes.
go
What-
ahead, jump right in.
Sure. What it means or translates to me is the limitations that people fail to recognize, that you're not going to have a full scope of having prior knowledge of what a youth might be going through, and recognizing you have limitations. And so not coming into any space or any conversation with any youth from a place of know-it-all. I've been there. I experienced that. You're not experiencing what that youth is experiencing at that particular moment in time. And so coming into that space, understanding that you have limitations and you need to allow the youth to express themselves and to talk it out however they see fit to talk it out. For instance, I'm a person that does not allow youth to curse at me or to use cursing language. Why? Because I think they're smarter than that. And that's a go-to, right? And that's the culture we live in. And so that is not the time for me to say, don't curse at me. That is not the time for me to say, don't use foul language. That's just not, that's my preference. They may respect that, but not at that moment. So I think coming into the space or the conversation, understanding that you have limitations is really essential for any person working with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that is a different take on understanding than I was thinking for myself. And I just really, I love the what you uplifted about really being youth centered, and then it's not a space for you to know everything and to approach with curiosity and not being judgmental. And I think that ties in with so many of the words that we see here on the screen, including compassion and empathy. I see youth centered popping up there too, and being youth led. So I appreciate that. If there are other yes, active listening. I didn't want to I wanted to give a shout out for our own active listening program that we have at Health and Medicine, but we can save that for another time. And I want to move us to the next question, but if you want to respond to what you just heard or add anything more to that first question, please do. Based on the word that you wrote for the first question, you had a lot of different responses. How well does the word that you share align with the schools or youth serving organizations in your community now, based on your experience? So not at all based on what you're seeing, is that word somewhat aligned with the practices and experiences you're seeing, or very aligned? So not surprising that we see, most of the responses so far coming into somewhat, although a little bit of not at all. Really want to hear from those of you that are saying very aligned. We'll give this, let's say 15 more seconds for responses to come in here.
I've already put in Aspen.
I do. There are a couple people
that are
that,
going to be grading the notes. When I ask, you should be taking them in blue or black ink.
oh, I'm just muted them person. There are a couple other responses in the chat, Geeta, for folks that are not participating in the AHA slides. I'm unable to vote for them, otherwise I would, but a nice little smattering of additional responses. And there's also a couple of emoji reactions on the slide, a couple of hearts and likes, and a couple of sad faces.
Okay. Well, I think we want to hear first from those of you that shared very aligned or somewhat aligned. I'm curious, what actions or community conditions are you seeing that are positively influencing the environments of the schools in your community? So, if it was very aligned or somewhat aligned, what is helping to make that happen? And can we move to the next slide so folks can put their responses in there? So if you selected very or somewhat aligned, what actions or community conditions are you seeing that positively influence the environments of the schools in your community?
There's also another comment in the chat from Elena saying there's high variability from school to school, but administratively not at all. And Kina said there are legal consequences.
Elena, while we are having more responses come in, if you're able, can you come off of mute and tell us a little bit more what you meant there?
Sure, absolutely. I think that structurally there's not a deep commitment. For example, in Chicago Public Schools, we have such high variability even within the same neighborhoods of who will, like, you will have two schools right next to each other. One may be much better funded than the one right next to it. And there's a lot, I mean, basically racism will completely tell you how well something is funded or healing centered. And so, and I think administratively that has not been addressed. And I think that there's high variability in quality of schools as well. So anyway, all of those things. I think Chicago Public Schools is a very large district, and even the whole thing about privatizing so many schools with it takes away resources that would otherwise go to neighborhood schools. So there's a lot of policy issues that feed into what I said.
And I think you might actually be, you might have responded to the next question that's coming up on some of the things that are creating barriers, but we know in schools that are able to be better resourced, that might positively influence the environment, while that's not happening at all somewhere else. Kina, did you want to talk a little bit more about legal consequences if they could be positively influencing environments of schools in the community?
I was agreeing with Miss Elena because I'm here in Chicago as well. Deal with a lot of suburban schools, out of Cook County schools, small town schools, and CPFs, South Suburban School Districts. And it's a fight. it's a fight on every end. And so the legal consequences on a more positive note, we're going to stay positive, on a
Yeah.
more positive note would be that if I'm not in the IEP, if I'm not in the 504 plan, if I'm not in those staffing meetings that predate any of those two plans being put in place, then I can resource out to Legal Assistance Foundation and have someone assigned who will be there at every step of the way.
Mm,
And so on a positive end, that's what I do for my kiddos.
mhm, mhm.
Because what is never going to be acceptable is using it's palatable and it's tangible, the racism from the north side to the south side or to the west side of Chicago. It's quite tangible, it's quite obvious. And I totally agree. Schools that are across the street from each other, down the street from each other, walking distance, a stone's throw, have different resources. And it depends on so many barriers that have nothing to do with this youth who needs a whole lot. And so just advocating for that, making sure the school is fully aware that there are others that are watching is sometimes the biggest help. And I hate to say it, but when people are scared of being on the news or getting funding cut, they act right.
Mm, mhm.
I mean, I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah,
I should
and-
say they act better. It might still be a fight, but it's less of an uphill fight by the time I've gotten to the superintendent.
Yes, and you've got some validation in the chat saying spot on. I am sure we have other heads nodding. So thank you both for sharing those experiences. I want to highlight some of the things we're seeing on the screen, if they are inspirational or aspirational for any of you too. But having TCI trainings, PD opportunities for, for faculty, hopefully staff as well, administrators, of course, schools working with coalitions to help with substance use, programs for vaping violations rather than going straight to these punitive measures. If you put school or community leadership, I would love to hear in the chat, like what specific things are you seeing from school or community leadership that are helping to influence schools in the community? I saw one just pop in, collaboration with schools to provide after school programs. Definitely that I think corresponds to what we see there with extracurricular activities and social groups. A couple things on here about schools engaging with restorative justice or restorative practices. I think that's very important. Increased mental health services and training. And then a couple comments in here kind of backing up what we've talked about, that we have some schools that are addressing the environment, addressing racism and inclusivity, but there's a huge variation just within the same region. I think there may be more responses to the next question, so we can go ahead and move to the next slide. I'm glad we have some examples of positive things that we're seeing in the community and in schools. But for those of you who said not at all, or, I also want to invite those of you who said somewhat, if you selected not at all or somewhat aligned, what are the actions or community conditions you're seeing that are creating challenges for the schools in your community?
So like I put not at all only because in our high school in Pilsen, Little Village, we had a mass shooting maybe I think 5 months ago, if that much. And that type of violence is never good. And we we need to support our schools and our students and in all schools, not just, in poor schools of color, but in all schools, we need to address that by including parents in the LSC more. I think we need to include community health workers in school boards and parents. I think it's a shame that the schools are run pretty much without the data from the community. We need to really start taking over these horrible shootings, because it was the first one here in Pilsen, but we feel scared now that this could be something that we need to address.
Yeah. Well, I'm right with you, and I'm curious, when you talk about data from the community, what kinds of things are on your mind that you
So
feel helpful?
what I mean is what I mean is, like, children and families are held liable for their report card grades, IEPs, everything is collected about the student, but I don't think we're collecting enough about the teachers, about the system, about the boards, about the overall progress of the schools in that community compared to, let's say, the great North Side schools, and why, how that affects the children's future. Do they go on to college? Do they drop out? I just think that if we just look at the day-to-day numbers, oh, they didn't reach this number, or they didn't reach this level, but I think that it's we didn't reach that level. And so that's where I'm coming from, because I sat on the local school council for many years, at least 15 years. So I firsthand, I understand a lot about the school
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah. I think what you just shared ties to one of the comments on screen here about people not having a good understanding of healing as a concept beyond the medical field. I think what you spoke to, is getting at, like, what are the root causes of some of these problems that we see, and what are all the different factors within schools, with and outside of schools, that are getting in the way of students being able to be healthy, be educated, that are, contributing to problems that we're seeing, but we're assigning the blame often to students and parents when, when there are other causes of these issues. And some of the other challenges that we see here are, funding. I see funding, stigma and funding. Thing I saw in the chat and here, things around policing and security, some, parent involvement, lack of parent engagement. And the last thing that came here, that initiatives are created at a high administrative level, not always inclusive of the people they need to be inclusive of. I did just get a little time reminder, because we want to come back to the main room and share some of the things that were in here. Wondering if we could just go to, I think, the final question for this room. If you could implement one change to make your schools or the schools in your community more trauma informed and healing centered, what would that change be? So I'm seeing have teachers take TCI, mandatory restorative justice protocols, time and funding for professional development for all staff, right? That's everyone who's engaging with youth in a building, stigma training, more education around this topic, smaller class sizes. I'll second my vote for that. I see changing tax structure. I am always in favor of that as well, to support holistic learning needs of CPS students. an engagement day for staff and parents to train together, similar to the next one involving parents and community and implementation. So keep those ideas coming. I see in the chat the structure of funding, having more counselors for sure, addressing racial issues and racism, giving people paid time to acquire skills. Our hope was that we might vote on some of these things that we would want to change most urgently, but honestly, all of these things are urgent. We probably don't need a vote to confirm that we feel that way. Yeah, knowing how to encourage families and work with families and parent engagement are also important. And I love these things about training students and working with students to be part of the solutions too, and more options for students. We often think about like, what do we do to train adults to serve students better? But if we're going to be youth-led and student-centered, they can be part of those solutions too. And I think we're going back to the main room in a moment, but we'll just end on, support the union and accountability for administrators and decision makers. So thank you all for contributing ideas during this session. We'll hear from what the other breakout room talked about, but I'll see you back all in the main room and appreciate your contributions to our breakout session now.
And we are just waiting for the other group to finish their conversation before the room closes. So we've got probably another 30 seconds if anybody has any final thoughts or contributions before we close the room.
Will folks be able to go back to the main room, or is it going to shut down for us?
You can click the leave room button at the bottom right hand screen if you're ready to go. And we will automatically close the room once we get the green light from the other room.
Thank you. And thanks for tech support in this room too, Hannah and Anna. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Getting that last comment into my notes too.
It'll be interesting to look at all those responses and group them because there was so much overlap in some of the thoughts.
I know you do like a grouping exercise too, so we'll see what the ACES team does with that. Will we be getting a notice with the close down? Okay. Hannah, will all the participants today, are we sending out copies of the slides, the responses from the slides, so folks will get those too?
Yeah, I think we should be able to. I'm hoping that I think there is a way that you're able to like save the slides too that kind of consolidates the information. So we'll share that out with folks.
Okay, great.
Myra is still saying, not yet, they're still talking.
This is where I wish I had some stand-up skills. I could entertain us all.
I don't know, Geeta might contribute to our trauma here for stand up.
Doubtful.
They're asking for another 2 minutes now, so.
Well, if they want another 2 minutes, I know we've lost some folks. Can we go back to that last slide, Hannah, with the things about one thing to change? if you all are able to still see this from your own view, you'll see a lot of different ideas on here. Let's actually try voting as long as we have time. And how many votes do folks get?
I think I upped it so you can vote for 3 different ideas.
Okay.
Hopefully that math works out.
Yeah, so I'm curious for those of you who are in here, you can vote just by clicking on the thumbs up button. If you could select 3 of these that you would hope to address, or you would hope somebody addresses most urgently, what would those 3 be for you? And Hannah, if you want to take a look when we go back to the main room, since you'll have the best view of the votes, you can share those out when we go back to the main room. It's like I can see here, mandatory restorative justice protocols has a couple votes, time and funding for professional development is a vote, so we may get a little spread here. I know some of these are similar, so we can combine the votes on those and you can choose one.
I'm curious for people that are in schools, if there already is any sort of standard restorative justice protocol or process that's used that could be rolled out to other schools? Like, could this be an easy, like a low hanging fruit?
Nope, there's our notice.
I'll check the results and be able to share. with you.
Okay, thank you.